Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. Well, we've got more to talk today about life on the 19th century farm, and we're at the Waterloo Farm Museum, and we say thanks to them for giving us a place to do it. And we're excited to have Jeremy and Felicia back with us from History Acres, and it's going to be a great collaboration with them. Felicia, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about lard today.
Lard. What is lard on the Civil War farm?
Lard is everything on the Civil War farm. It's used for so many different things. It's used for food preservation. It's used, well, one reference we found, they even used it like butter on bread. I mean, to them, it's everything.
It's like the butter on bread. There's the Cottage Economy book, which was published over in Britain and pretty popular, multiple publications between like 1820 and the 1830s. And he specifically says that if a country child won't eat lard spread on a piece of bread, then they're like no good. Like they're spoiled. So.
Great. Okay, so where does lard come from?
Yeah, it comes pigs, hogs, swine, right? It's pig fat. And particularly in the 19th century, there are actual lard breeds and they still exist today. That's what we raise as a lard breed, guinea hogs. And they were meant to get very large, much plumper than anyone would want a pig today because we're concerned with lean meat. And back then it was about lard. They wanted as much of that as they could off the pig.
Okay, so what do we do? Why do we want so much of it? What do we do with it?
You can preserve food with it. You can eat it on different things. You can use it to grease things. You can use it for light. I mean, you can use it for so many different things. And in that period, even America's exporting lard. So it's just so important to all the different people.
Yeah, I actually pulled some statistics on that because I thought this was interesting. In the 19th century, lard was a growing export in the United States. So I found in 1845, we were exporting 10 million pounds of lard just to the UK alone.
Wow.
By 1878, that grew to 80 million pounds, and it's still part of our economy. As of 2019, we were the number one exporter of lard, and it was over like $8 million a year. So small portion of the economy, but it's still part of our exports.
Great, but in the Civil War farm, it sounds like it's in some ways life and death. And if we think back to when we visited with our friend Brian Egan on the Why Pork episode, he talked about how you could use everything but the squeal on a pig on the Civil War farm.
Oh yeah, and the great part about with pigs is you can use kind of your food scraps, and they turn those food scraps into usable things. You know, and one of my favorite quotes I think Jeremy has about the pig is, they wanted their pigs to get big. If it could walk so far, it wasn't big enough because they wanted all of that lard.
Yeah, so if your pig could walk 200 yards without stopping to sit, it wasn't big enough.
Fantastic. Well, is there only one type of lard on the pig?
No, we actually have a couple different types. So primarily it falls into two categories, and reading through period text seems they divided it up in a similar fashion. There's leaf lard, which is what we have here. And you can see it sort of looks like a leaf. Also, I've seen it referenced to as loose lard as well. And loose because it actually hangs kind of loose in the body cavity, and it has very little or no porky taste or smell at all.
What are you going to use leaf lard for once it's been rendered?
Yeah, so there's a finite amount of leaf lard compared to the rest of the lard. So it's really pastries and baking, so you don't want your pie to taste like pork. So you're going to want to use it with the leaf lard.
And cosmetics too. You don't want to smell like pork when you've used like hand lotion or a cold cream or things like that.
So, and is that the majority on the hog?
No, it's a very small amount in comparison, especially when you consider you can grow your hog bigger, and it's going to put fat on the outside. So you're going to have a lot more kind of back fat. And that back fat is there also as kind of protection for them from predators and whatnot, because, you know, if they get injured in the back fat, that's going to heal. And so that's kind of why they have so much back fat on the pigs. And you can get way more of that and use that for other things like frying and things like that.
So the leaf lard is the choice lard.
Yes.
And there'd be two leaves in that body cavity. So this would be half. And this is one leaf off of a 12 to 13 month old guinea hog.
And the other lard we have sitting here?
Yep, so this would be back fat. I've seen it referenced also as seam lard or inward lard. The seam lard referencing to it makes a lot of sense. We didn't have a real good example with our trimmings here, but the back fat there actually has a seam running through it. So you have skin and a layer of lard or fat. There's a seam, another layer of lard and fat, and then the actual meat. So you can actually follow that seam and separate it with your hands.
Got it. So we keep using a term here that we're used to using, and people probably have heard today talking about things rendering. If you're looking for this in Civil War cookbooks, am I going to find rendering lard?
No.
No, and that was a tricky thing, and I think you really were the one that caught on to the fact that it's trying lard, and once that opened up the whole world of lard in the period books. So trying lard, also seen it as melting lard, but trying lard seems to be the dominant.
Okay, so when we render or try lard, are we going to lump this all into one bucket and do it all at once?
No, they would always render it separate because they have the different uses. And so you don't want to put your leaf lard in with your back fat because then you're just going to make it taste porky. So you're going to do them separately.
Is there a process difference between the two?
Nope, you do them the same.
What's our process?
So you're going to start off by cutting it up into small pieces, increasing the surface area that's heating, and then you'll put it into your pot, which we have a cast iron kettle to do that with today. And then there's different instructions depending on where you're reading it from. Some said to add salt. One of them said adding salt is a waste because it just settles at the bottom of your pot. So there's so many different directions in different books. So for our purpose today, we're just going to render it without salt, and then we'll add a little bit of water to keep it from scorching until it starts rendering.
Great. And what does the rendering process do?
So it's going to pull the moisture out of the lard, and then it makes it shelf stable.
Well, Felicia, if you want to lead, you've done this more. We've all three of us have done this before in the past, and we've done this together in different interpretive settings. But if you take the lead on this, let's go ahead and get started.
Sure.
Okay, so what do we do?
Yeah, so we're going to take the lard and we're going to cut it up into 1/2 inch or smaller pieces. And then the other thing that you really want to do is make sure you're cutting out the meaty bits. And so if this was a day where we processed the whole pig, which generally is kind of how you would do this, you would take that and put that in with your sausage scraps. And you're also going to use the back fat in with your sausage as well.
Why are we cutting it so small? What's going to help? What's that going to help?
Yeah, it's going to increase the surface area, so it's going to render faster and a little bit more evenly.
Okay.
So all of this came from, as we were butchering that animal, trimming out that back fat, and then we did trim some of the pork chops and other roasts and things like that. We pulled some of the lard off. It's delicious and helps keep the meat tender and moist. So we did leave a good chunk of that on there, but that's where all of this comes from. And this is about 2 pounds of lard, and it was a fraction of what was on that pig. And she wasn't that large. She was probably she was a little under 200 pounds.
So I see you bringing a cast iron pot over here, Jeremy. What is going to be next in the process? We've cut it up.
Yep, so we've actually had this sitting. It's not hot. It's just starting to get warm, get us a little bit ahead of the game. So she's cubing that up. We'll throw that in that cast iron kettle. Add a little bit of water, like you said, to help so the bottom doesn't scorch until it gets some rendering going, a little bit of melting, and then that'll just go on the fire at a really low temperature. You really don't even want to see it bubble. Like bubbling almost starts to it's too hot. You want this to be a slow process. You don't want to burn it or scorch it in any way because that's really going to intensify any porkiness. And also...
so I can't rush this?
No.
You can't.
It doesn't preserve as well if you scorch it as well.
Great. Well, let's cut the rest of this up and then we put it on the fire. Let's go ahead and see that. And how long do we think it's going to take to render this?
Hours.
Yeah, if I just had to throw a guess, I'm going to say 4+ hours. So the last time we just did some leaf lard a week ago, and I think it was on the stove for 3 to 4 hours for that leaf lard.
Well, we'll get this cut up. We'll get it in the pot. You'll see it go on the fire, and we'll start a clock, and we'll keep an eye on things. You'll see it a little bit through, and then let's come back and talk at the end about how we take the lard out of the pot and how we store it ahead of using it. We'll see in a little bit. Well, welcome back. It's been about 4 hours. We warned you we'd keep the time, and we're back. The lard has rendered just as slowly as we can. If you see a few bubbles around the edge, that's fine. If you see too many in the middle, we're cooking too fast. And the lard, what's going to happen if you do it too fast?
It's going to scorch, so it's not going to taste as good and not preserve as well.
Which the big thing, taste is one thing in our world, but really when you're talking about surviving on a farm and using everything you have, making it work is the big deal there.
And if you scorch it, they wouldn't throw it away. It'd just be for different purposes. I mean, really, we look at the different uses for lard. You'd have that leaf lard like we talked about that doesn't have that pork smell at all or taste, to the nicely rendered back fat that's snow white still to use for cooking, preserving, and then you might have some stuff that was a little scorched, or sort of the drudges of the pot that you don't want to pour into your nice lard that you could use for lubrication or other methods.
Okay, with all those options, we need to get it finished up. I see we still have it in the pot. Where do we go from here, and what are our options?
Yeah, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to strain it. So we're going to ladle it out and we're going to put it through some cheesecloth. And what that's doing is that's pulling some of that debris out so it stays nice and white and you don't get this porkiness from any sort of like pieces of meat that got left in it, or kind of sinewy bits that don't render out.
And what are we straining it into here?
So we're straining it into a crock. You can strain it into tin, but we've heard from some friends that have done it into tin that it changes the color. And crockery is readily available as well. So
one of the sources I looked to actually said stoneware crock was the preferred method as well.
So both experimental archaeology and original documentation. So Felicia, I see a whole bunch of chunks in there that we're straining out. What are we seeing?
Yeah, so those are kind of the bits that didn't render, whether they're little meaty bits that got missed, or kind of the sinewy bits, or a little bit of the fat that doesn't render. And those are called cracklings. And so you can, when we're all done, we'll pull this up and we'll squeeze the lard out of them, and then you can eat them. I think I've seen stuff about putting them in soup, or my personal favorite, I feed them to my chickens.
So is that everything?
For the most part, there's going to be a little bit at the bottom, and a lot of period references talk about not pouring that in. Kind of that's got your little bits that aren't going to strain out well. It's got kind of maybe some of your scorched bits, and so they would pour that out into a different container because it's not quite as nice.
Any uses for it, or is that just finally what you discard after you've worked your way all the way from the pig to the fat, to the render, to the cracklings?
Oh no, you can definitely use it for stuff like frying things or lubricating things or anything like that. Waste not, want not.
Very good. So what's our next step here?
So you're going to untie that, and then he's going to pull up the cheesecloth, squeeze out any lard out of the cracklings, and then we can lay them out and use them for whatever purpose we decide. And look at all of that great lard coming out.
Still more comes out. Wow. Talk about waste not, want not.
Exactly.
And there's those beautiful cracklings that some would probably love to salt and eat, or, well, we feed them to chickens.
Well, the cycle keeps on going, and frugality provides a lot for a 19th century farm. So what next for the lard in the crock?
You just let it cool, and then it'll be shelf stable, and they would have just used it out of the crock. You want to make sure basically that's kept kind of in a cool, dry place away from sunlight.
Well, thank you guys. It's really great to be back on screen with you guys again, and we're excited to be working with History Acres and look forward to coming to visit the farm in a couple of months once we get the weather a little bit nicer here in the Midwest. Great. Thank you for spending your time with Civil War Digital Digest. I hope you gained another piece of experience from the Civil War era farm with more from the pig. Lard is cooking, it's preservation, it's care of your body, and its care of machinery. There's so many uses for this in the Civil War farm. I hope you found a little more connection to life in that era through this. We'll see you again soon.